Two guys are sitting in their San Francisco apartment, completely broke. They can't afford rent. They're about to be evicted. Their names are Chesky and Joe Gebbia. They've been trying to start a company for months, but nobody believes in their idea. They want to let strangers rent out air mattresses in people's homes. Investors think it's insane. Who would let strangers sleep in their house? Who would want to sleep on someone's floor? 7 investors reject them. One investor tells them, "This is the worst idea I've ever heard." Brian and Joe are desperate. They have no money. They need to pay rent. So they come up with a crazy plan. There's a big design conference happening in San Francisco. Hotels are sold out. Brian and Joe decide to create special edition cereal boxes and sell them at the conference. They call it Obama O's and Captain McCain's. They design the boxes by hand. They buy cereal in bulk. They glue the boxes together themselves. Then they sell them for $40 a box. It works. They make $30,000 selling cereal. It's just enough to keep the company alive. But investors still say no. 7 more rejections. Then, in 2009, they get into Y Combinator, a startup accelerator. Y Combinator gives them $20,000 in mentorship. Airbnb starts to grow. Slowly at first, then faster. By 2011, Airbnb is in 89 countries. By 2020, Airbnb goes public. The company is worth over $75 billion. Brian Chesky and Joe Gebbia, the guys who sold cereal boxes to pay rent, are now billionaires. And the investors who said no? They missed out on one of the biggest companies in the world. This is the story of how desperation, cereal boxes, and refusing to quit built a $75 billion empire. Let's rewind to 2007. Brian Chesky and Joe Gebbia were roommates in San Francisco. They were both designers. They just graduated from the Rhode Island School of Design. They moved to San Francisco to pursue their dreams of starting a company. But they had no idea what that company would be. They were broke. Rent in San Francisco was insanely expensive. In October 2007, there was a big design conference in the city. Hotels were completely sold out. Brian and Joe had an idea. What if they rented out air mattresses in their apartment to conference attendees who couldn't find a hotel? They set up a simple website. They called it Air Bed and Breakfast. 3 people booked air mattresses. Brian and Joe made a little money. But more importantly, they realized something. There was demand for short-term affordable housing. What if they built a platform where anyone could rent out their spare room or couch? In 2008, Brian and Joe brought in a third co-founder, Nathan Blecharczyk, a programmer. Together, they launched Airbnb, but nobody cared. The site had almost no users. Investors thought the idea was terrible. Who would trust strangers in their home? One famous investor told them, "This will never work. People don't want to sleep in someone else's house." Brian, Joe, and Nathan kept pitching. They pitched to over 7 investors. Every single one said no. Meanwhile, Brian and Joe were running out of money. They couldn't pay rent. They were about to lose their apartment. They needed cash fast. Then Brian had an idea. The 2008 presidential election was happening. Barack Obama versus John McCain. There was a lot of excitement around the election. Brian thought, what if we make special edition cereal boxes? They designed 2 boxes, Obama O's, the Breakfast of Change, and Captain McCain's, a maverick in every bite. They bought bulk cereal. They printed custom boxes. They hand-assembled 1,000 boxes. Then they went to the Democratic National Convention and sold them for $40 each. It was absurd. But it worked. They sold out. They made $30,000. It wasn't much, but it kept Airbnb alive for a few more months. But they were still struggling. The site wasn't growing. Investors still said no. Then in early 2009, Airbnb applied to Y Combinator, one of the most prestigious startup accelerators in the world. At first, Y Combinator wasn't interested. But then Paul Graham, the founder of Y Combinator, heard about the cereal box story. He thought anyone crazy enough to sell cereal boxes to fund their startup is someone worth betting on. Y Combinator accepted Airbnb. They gave them $20,000 and 3 months of mentorship. Paul Graham told Brian and Joe, "Go to your users, talk to them, figure out what they need." Brian and Joe took his advice. They flew to New York and knocked on the doors of Airbnb hosts. They asked, What can we do to make this better? They discovered that the photos on listings were terrible. People were taking blurry pictures with their phones. Potential guests didn't trust the listings. So Brian and Joe rented a camera and personally photographed their hosts' apartments. The listings with professional photos got way more bookings. Airbnb started to grow. In 2010, Airbnb raised $600,000 from Sequoia Capital. In 2011, they raised over $100 million. By 2011, Airbnb had listings in 89 countries. It was becoming a global phenomenon. Hotels started to worry. Airbnb was disrupting the entire hospitality industry. But Airbnb faced challenges. Cities tried to ban it. Hotels sued. There were safety concerns. Some hosts had bad experiences. But Brian, Joe, and Nathan kept improving the platform. They added reviews, verification, insurance. They made Airbnb safer and more trustworthy. By 2017, Airbnb was valued at $31 billion. By 2020, Airbnb went public. On its first day of trading, the stock price doubled. Airbnb's market value hit $75 billion. Brian Chesky's net worth reached over $11 billion. Joe Gebbia and Nathan Blakarczyk became billionaires too. The guys who sold cereal boxes just to survive were now among the richest people in the world. And the 7 investors who rejected them? They missed out on one of the most valuable companies ever created. So what happened? Airbnb was rejected by 7 investors. They were told the idea would never work. But Brian, Joe, and Nathan didn't quit. They sold cereal boxes. They did whatever it took to survive. When Airbnb got into Y Combinator, Brian and Joe didn't just sit in their office. They went to their users. They knocked on doors. They took photos. They solved problems. Airbnb didn't try to compete with hotels on their terms. They created an entirely new category. They let regular people become hosts. They turned empty rooms into income. Hotels started losing because Airbnb changed the game. Brian Chesky and Joe Gebbia couldn't pay rent. They sold cereal boxes for $40. Investors rejected them 7 times. But they refused to quit. And today, Airbnb is worth $75 billion. Because sometimes the craziest ideas are the ones that change the world.